Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're well. Thank you for tuning in. Today is Wednesday. It's December the 2nd. We're getting ready for Parshas Vayishlach, and we're gathered today to learn Torah. This morning was the Levaya, was the funeral for Mr. Harold Katz, and our Torah study that we're engaged in today should be a zechus for his neshama. He's on his way, together with Barbara and some other family members. He's on his way to Israel for burial as we speak, as we learn. So our Torah study today should be a zechus for his neshama. So his name was Si Mordechai ben Eliyahu HaKohen. So we're going to take a look at some of the commentaries on Parshas Vayishlach. Some you may be familiar with, and some might be new to you. So let's jump right in together. So this is Parshas Vayishlach. I've got it on the screen for you, just in case you weren't able to print it out from the email that went out. But here it is on the screen. So right towards the, I would say this was actually about in the middle of the Parsha. Vayishlach begins that Yaakov is very nervous. He's going to return to the land of Israel after being away in Lavan's house for 22 years. He's coming back with his wives and his children. He's very nervous about encountering his brother Esav, because Esav wanted to kill him when he had left Israel. So he tries to placate Esav by sending him all sorts of gifts and messages, and it seems to have worked. And we're going to pick up today, right after they've had their encounter. Esav offered to continue on with Yaakov and the family and accompany them. Yaakov politely turned down the offer, and Esav goes his way, and Yaakov goes his way. So let's see. The pasuk says, "Vayashav bayom ahu Esav ladarko seira." So that day, when they split ways, Esav and his whole band went their way. They went to Seir, and according to many, that's like modern day Jordan, just outside of Israel. The Yaakov nasa Sukkosa. Yaakov continued on, went into Israel, and he went to a place called Sukkos. Vayiven lo bayis, he built a house for himself. Ulemikneu asa Sukkos, and for his cattle and for his animals, he made Sukkos, he made booths, he made huts. Al Kain, because of this, kara shem hamakom Sukkos. That's why the place earned its name, and it's called Sukkos. So we've just been told about this place that Yaakov's first stop before returning to his parents to see his parents who had sent him away. His first stop is at a place called Sukkos. Then he's going to stop in Shechem, and then he'll continue on. But so he's stopped in Sukkos, and how did Sukkos get its name? Because of the fact that when Yaakov arrives in Sukkos, he builds a house for him and his family, and for his animals, he makes these Sukkos, these corrals, or these booths, you might say, and that's why it's called Sukkos. Let's just see Rashi. Rashi here tells us a tradition from the Midrash that the Chazal had in terms of how long they actually spent in Sukkos. So Rashi says, "V'even lo bayis." So again, if you look at the pasuk, so it says, we'll see where Rashi gets this from. Rashi's quoting the Midrash. Let's see. Shahasham shmona eser chadash. He was in Sukkos for a total of 18 months. Kayetz, he was there for a winter season. V'choref, a summer season. V'kayetz, and a winter season. Now, what alludes to this? So the Medrash that Rashi's quoting says, because look in the pasuk, and you'll see the word says Sukkos. It says that they arrived in Sukkos, and he built Sukkos for his animals. Sukkos denotes Kayetz, the summer, because that's the time of the year that people will dwell in a sukkah. Bayis, it also used the word bayis in this pasuk, a house. That connotes choref, a winter, because when it's cold and raining, you want to be in a house. And then it says Sukkos again at the end. So Sukkos Kayetz, so Sukkos connotes another summer. So if you combine these three seasons together, a winter and a summer and a winter, that alludes to the fact that they spent 18 months in this place. So that's this Masorah that Chazal has, that Sukkos, how long did they spend in Sukkos? A total of 18 months. Okay, having said that, here's a fascinating Orach Chaim I want to share with you. The Orach Chaim says, Nasa Sukkosa. So Yaakov and the whole Chevra, his whole family, they go to Sukkos, and we're told that the reason why the place earned its name Sukkos, it wasn't called Sukkos prior to Yaakov's arrival, it earned its name Sukkos because of the fact that he built Sukkos there. Animal booths or huts for his animals. So the Orach Chaim brings this question, Vim Tomar, if you might ask, just because he built shelters, he built these huts for his animals, that's why the place is called Sukkos? That's not like such a monumental, momentous occasion. Oh my gosh, something really wild happened here. So we have to name the place Sukkos. He also built a house. I'm sure other stuff happened there. They were there for 18 months. Why did this place earn the name Sukkos? Because he built the sukkah for his animals. Imagine someone builds a doghouse for their dog. Now we're going to call the neighborhood doghouse? What does that mean? So let's see the Orach Chaim what he says. V'im tomar v'chi b'shvil shasa sham Yaakov sukkah yikra makom kain. That's why he earns its name, because he built sukkahs for his animals. So Orach Chaim has the following theory. Ulai, perhaps one might postulate and say, Ki asa davar chadash. Yaakov did something entirely new, novel. V'chem laso al mikneh. He had compassion on his animals. Mashalo asa kain adam kodem. No human being had ever done something like this before. Shiachin sukkah lebehemos. To actually build a shelter for their animals. This was a new event in world history. The Orach Chaim's theory is perhaps Yaakov was the first human being to actually build some kind of shelters for their animals. If you stop and think about it, before man domesticated animals, they were living out in the wild. They were doing just fine on their own. All those dogs that were part of some wild pack, they didn't have a roof over their head. All those goats, sheep, cows, whatever animals that become domesticated, horses, whatever they are, they were living out in the wild and they didn't have any shelters, and somehow or another they were doing just fine. At some point in human history, when humankind domesticates animals, and now we take it for granted that it's our responsibility to build shelters for them. But until that point in history, that wasn't the way the world worked. So when did that change? So the Orach Chaim's theory is Yaakov could have been the one who initiated all this. Mashalo asa kain adam kodem. Prior to Yaakov, perhaps no human being had ever shown such compassion to animals. Shiachin sukkah lebehemos, to actually build a shelter for them and say, just deal with nature the way you were dealing it until you became my domestic animal. And because of this new and this massive innovation, kara hamakom alav. That's why the place earned its name. So it's a fascinating theory that the Orach Chaim has, is that the reason why the place was called Sukkos, the Pasuk tells us, is because Yaakov built Sukkos for his animals. Shkoach, what's the big deal? Isn't that a regular occurrence? That's no big deal. So the Orach Chaim suggests, no, that was a big deal. Perhaps this was the first time in human history Yaakov Avinu could have been the one who initiated this concept, that if we're taking responsibility for these animals, we take them out of the wild, we domesticated them, now we should be providing them with shelter too. Because of this shinoi, because of this innovation that he made, it made such an impression on people. People called the place Sukkos. Wow, because this is where the concept came to be. A fascinating idea that the Orach Chaim has, and I think there's something we can learn from this, even for those of us who aren't pet owners, is that I think there's something we can learn from this, and that is, Yaakov Avinu was not the first person to domesticate animals. There are plenty of shepherds before him. Lavan had plenty of animals. Tons of people had plenty of animals. This was what people did. Everyone had animals. Orach Chaim doesn't suggest Yaakov is the first one who domesticated animals. What the Orach Chaim suggests is he's the first one who makes that next step and says, if I domesticated them, I took them out of the wild, I'm providing them with their sustenance. I'm not letting them fend for themselves. In a sense, I've separated them from that natural streak, that wild streak that was in them beforehand. Now I should show them some more chemla. I should show them some more compassion and build them a shelter too. So here was something that Yaakov was not the first shepherd. He wasn't the first one who had domesticated animals, but he was the first one who felt that achrayus, felt that responsibility, felt that need to provide them with that extra level of compassion. And perhaps that's something we can learn from Yaakov, is that there are opportunities that abound all around us where other people, ourselves included, may have missed it. We may have said there was an opportunity for chesed, there was an opportunity to show chemla, to show compassion, and we've missed it until now. Others have missed it until now. But if we keep our antennas up, if we keep our eyes open, if we keep our ears open, we might recognize that hidden in plain sight, right in front of us, are opportunities to be a Baal Chesed, an opportunity to act with compassion and to share our what we have, the resources we have with others. In this case, it was animals. But if that was true with animals, then kol shekain, certainly when it comes to human beings, we can share with them as well. I thought that was a fascinating idea. I want to share with you something I saw this year I had never seen before. It was the Targum Yonasan. The Targum Yonasan is one of the Aramaic translations and / commentaries. Because again, every translation is also a commentary because there's always going to be multiple words that a person could choose for how to translate this word from Lashon Kodesh, from the original Hebrew, into whatever vernacular they're using. And our choice of which word, in a certain sense, is a form of a commentary. So when we say the Targum is an Aramaic translation, it's really more than a translation, it's a commentary. And there are times where they even expand on that they'll add words and they'll add into the commentary, not just translate. This is a fascinating one that I never saw. I don't think I ever saw this or heard of until this year. So look, the way that, let's just read the pasuk again. The pasuk says, Yud Zayin, Yaakov nasa Sukkosa, Yaakov traveled to Sukkos, Vayiven lo bayis, he built a house for himself, Lemikneo asa Sukkos, for his animals, he built these booths or huts. In Kara Shema Makom Sukkos, that's why the place is called Sukkos. Let's look at how the Targum Yonasan translates and comments on this. Yaakov natal l'Sukkos, Yaakov journeys to Sukkos, V'isa cave Taman Tresar Yarche Shasa, and he sojourned there for 12 months of the year. So right away, that's a different Masorah than Rashi. Rashi quoted the Medrash. It said he was there for 18 months. So the Targum Yonasan has a different tradition that he was only there for 12 months. That's fine, different tradition. So he was either there 12 months or 18 months. Look at this next part. Ubana le be midrasha. The pasuk said he built a bias. Now the Targum Yonasan says, what kind of bias? What kind of house? Ubana le be midrasha. He built there a house of study. He built a base medrash. Ulegeso abad matlan. And for his flocks, he made booths. Begin came because of this, Karash Shema de Asra Sukkos. They called the name of the place Sukkos. So what's fascinating about this Targum Yonasan is that number one, he says that Yaakov and his family were there for 12 months. Again, Rashi said 18. That's a different tradition, fine. But this next line is fascinating. When the pasuk said that he built a bias, it said, Vayiven lo bias. We all translated that. Until I saw this Targum Yonasan, we always translated that to mean in the literal sense. For his family and himself, they built a house. For animals, they built huts. He says, what kind of house did he build? It wasn't a house to live in. Ubana le be midrasha. Yaakov was insistent, we're building a base medrash. We're getting to work, we're building a base medrash, a study hall. That's what he did. And that's absolutely fascinating. I want to share with you a beautiful observation that I saw in this Targum Yonasan from Rav Simcha Zissel Broidi. So we've been quoting Rav Simcha Zissel Broid in our classes in this past year because of the fact that I treated myself to a set of his Sfarim. He has a set of Sfarim called Sam Derech. Very often they revolve around the Ramban, Nachmanides' commentary to the Torah, but it's not always, and this is a beautiful example. Rav Simcha Zissel, as we said about him, he was a Rosh Yeshiva in the Chevron Yeshiva for over 40 years. He had studied and grown up and learned in the Chevron Yeshiva. He started when it was originally in Chevron. He actually spent some time in the original yeshiva in Lithuania, in Slobodka as well. But his primarily was in the yeshiva in Israel, in Chevron, and then in Yerushalayim. As we said in the past, he would have been a contemporary of Memphis' own Dave Shainberg, Hashem Yikam Damav, who was killed in the 1929 Chevron massacre. So Rav Simcha Zissel, I want to share with you something beautiful that he has on this Targum Yonasan. Yaakov Nasa Sukkosa. So I'm on page 2 now. The Yaakov Nasa Sukkosa. Yaakov and the family that traveled to Sukkos. Vayiven lo bayis, they built a house. L'mikneo asa Sukkos. For the animals, they built huts. Al ken karash shema makom Sukkos. That's why they call the place Sukkos. Fine, that's the pasuk. So he says, L'shem ma bana Yaakov avinu bayis. Why did Yaakov build a house? So I would have assumed, and I did assume until this year, that he built a house to live in with his family. Bira Targum Yonasan, the Targum Yonasan explains, even lo bias, what does it mean that he built a house? Ubana le be midrasha. He built a house of study, built a base medrash. Mavur b'dvarav, what do you see from the words of the Targum Yonasan? Yesod nifla, an absolutely amazing fundamental idea. Bias bonim bishvil beis hamedrash. He's choosing to say bias. What's a bias? He built a bias because he needed a base medrash. This was absolutely essential. Before they enter Eretz Yisrael, they need a base medrash. Makom hamivtzar, that's a fortress. Lihinatzal mipnei Esav mahu. What's the fortress that Klal Yisrael needs to defend ourselves against Esav? Base medrash. That's what was necessary, a house of study. That is the fortress of Yaakov. Kol Yaakov. What do we always say about Yaakov Avinu? That it's the voice of Yaakov, which is the main essence of our strength. Torah nishmas v'nilmedes b'beis medrash. The Torah that can be heard and learned and listened to and taught in the beis medrash. Hi mivtzar. That is our fortress. V'abitachon, and that's our security. Li'sagev mipnei Esav, to protect ourselves from Esav. Yaakov was so scared of Esav. Even after he sent him his gifts, he's always wondering, is this a permanent peace Esav made with me? Is he coming back to attack? I need to do something. What did he do? What's the best way to defend Klal Yisrael? In addition, I'm sure he also had lookouts and stuff like that. But in addition to all that, he said, we need a beis medrash. Even now, there would be a great question. Madua lo kara l'shema makom al shema yeshiva. So if now, according to the Targum Yonasan, bias means he built a beis medrash, when they're naming the name, why they name the place Sukkos? Name the place Yeshiva, name the place beis medrash. That seems to be the ikr, that seems to be the more important detail that was built. Shebana b'makom, that he built a beis medrash and a yeshiva there. Uvachar likros l'shema makom ha-sukkos. Why they choose the place to call the place Sukkos? Al shema Sukkos l'mikneu, the huts that were built for animals. Yisod amuk va'atzum tamun kad. So Rav Simcha Zissel says there's a beautiful fundamental lesson that's hidden here. Yaakov Avinu lamad v'limed. Yaakov learned and taught. He av shabam l'Sukkos, even though they arrived in Sukkos. Hu arai. He says, we only came here, it was temporary. What is a sukkah? A sukkah is arai. A sukkah is a temporary dwelling. Burak makom ma'aver laleches halal eretz Yisrael. This is just a temporary stopover on our way to Israel. Everything there was built on a temporary basis. And he and his family, they lived in tents. He built these huts for his animals. But the beis medrash, even though this was just a temporary spot, he says, even though it's temporary, we need a beis medrash. We need a yeshiva. We don't say that that's temporary. For that, we built the building. Even though he says we're only here for a little bit, we still need a mechubadik building. This is our beis medrash. Hamivtzar shel Am Yisrael, the fortress of Judaism. Who are yeshiva? That's our yeshiva where we study Torah, get engaged in Torah. And there's no concept of building a temporary place. We need something that's going to last. We only build something that's temporary when it comes to concerns regarding ourselves and our physical beings, or our animals, our possessions. So there was an incredible depth. There was a lot of logic why they chose to call the region Sukkos. Al Shem Osan Sukkos Arayos. So they named the place because of the Sukkos, the temporary huts that were built, Shabbanon Miknei, for animals. Lefarsem, in order to publicize, Lodian, to let everyone know, She'ein Kam Makom Moshavo. This is not the place where we intend to stay permanently. Remember, according to Targum Yonasan, it was 12 months. Rashi, according to Medrash, was 18 months. Enu bona mivanim kavuim letzonenu. We do not build permanent homes for our animals. Even if we got a lot of animals. Even though we need a lot of space, a lot of fields, a lot of corrals and fenced in areas, even if they're strong, even if we need places for our animals. When it comes to Yaakov, if it's about my money, about my possessions, or even about myself, who are I? For that, we can make do with a temporary structure. That's why he called the place Sukkos. He called the place Sukkos to teach a lesson, is that for ourselves, for what we're going to live in as tents, what our animals are going to live in as huts, all that can be Sukkos, all that can be temporary. But what we don't make temporary is what our ruchnius, what our spiritual lives revolve around, which is going to be our beis medrash, where we're going to get engaged in Torah. And how amazing is this? In a region that is known for its temporary nature. That's why they named the city, this whole area, they named it for the temporary nature. In the midst of all that, Hakvius b'binyan beis hamedrash, in the middle of a place that's named temporary, in the middle of all that is this cinder block, is a permanent structure that was built as a beis medrash, hayeshiva. From this we're taught, Al godel hachashiva shel yisodei yeshiva. How important it is for a community to have its yeshiva, to have its day school, its place of Torah education. How essential it is, absolutely fundamental it is for the survival of the Jewish people. And it doesn't make a difference. We might only be in a place for a short period of time. We have to build a school. We have to build a yeshiva. That's absolutely fundamental. What did Yaakov do? Sukkot was on the other side of the Jordan. Before he entered into the land of Israel, he says, let's stop and let's study Torah. Before they entered into the land of Canaan, they didn't pass over the Jordan yet. They either stayed there for 12 months, according to Targum Yonasan, or according to Rashi, the Medrash quoted 18 months. He says, before we go into Israel, we have to spend some time while we're, so to say, always on the lookout, looking over our shoulder to see if Esav's going to come and get us. We have to do something to get our heads screwed on straight before we go into Israel. And he was always there waiting, before we could, I'm going to delay going into the land of Israel, meeting the beloved father Yitzchak, Shaloru Kfar Shanim Rabos, who he has not seen in 20 years, more than 22 years, Mishum Shekodem Knisaso Le'eretz Canaan, before he could enter into the land of Canaan, in Kol Bnei Beisa with all his family, Ratzah Mitchila Lischonen Bebeis HaMedrash, Shebana Livnei Beisa. We first need to spend some time in the Beis Medrash. I need to make them spiritually prepared to enter into the land of Israel. I have to spend some time with them, teaching them Torah and trust and belief and faith in Hashem before we enter into the land of Israel. We've got to be on a higher spiritual plane in Israel. So before we go in, we're setting up a yeshiva. This also explains why on earth did they delay? Just go back to Israel. Why did they delay before either a month, or either 12 months or 18 months? Why did they delay? Yaakov said, we're not spiritually yet ready to go into Israel. We have to be on a higher plateau. Let's build a Beis Medrash, a yeshiva. Beis Medrash then Nikra B'Torah, and when the Torah refers to this Beis Medrash as Vayiven Lo Bayis, he built a permanent structure house. Moshe Nisbar, like I explained, Shebeis Yaakov Avinu Lo Haya Makom Megurim Ela Yeshiva, Sheba Yanku Nivnu Begadlu Shiftei Ka. That the house of Yaakov was not just a regular place that people lived in, rather it was a yeshiva that raised and educated those who would end up being the Shiftei Ka, the tribes of God. Yaakov Avinu Yada, and Yaakov knew, it's Canaan, before we could enter into the land of Israel, we have to raise our spiritual level. Allah v'chaneches b'nei beso, that it's my responsibility to educate my family, b'bayis hagadol b'beis medrash, in this great house, in this beis medrash. V'rak az, only then, yuchal yichanes laretz, only then can we enter into the land, hanechseves shecha hashtokeg lashula, that land that we've been longing to return to. And it was worth all that money and all the gifts that we sent to Esav, and also was worth delaying, returning to meet his father, that was waiting and it was such a troubled wait it was anticipating that reunion. Nonetheless, it was worth waiting there, either a year or a year and a half, in order to study together, to learn Torah before entering into the land of Israel. This is a beautiful idea. What this is pointing out, Rav Simcha Zissel, on many levels, is pointing out is that in our communities, the most permanent structure that we should have is for our yeshiva, for the education, for where we go to be engaged with the Torah. Our day school, that should be the most important spot in the community, and that should be the place that has the greatest sense of permanence to it. It also answers the question, according to this Targum Yonasan, why did Yaakov and the family hang out in Sukkot for a while? Why not just go back directly into Israel? So it says, no, they didn't feel they were spiritually ready for it yet. So that's why they needed to be there, and they built this yeshiva there. And it's a fundamental lesson for our own lives and for our possessions, our animals, that we can have arai, that we can have temporary structures for. But for our yeshiva, for our day school, that's got to be permanent. That has to be, we send a message. We send a message to the community. We send a message to our children about our value system. And what what do we elevate over what? When we make certain that where they are learning and where they are studying and where we're studying, where we're learning is in a permanent, beautiful structure, that sends an important message about what our values are and our sense of priorities. I thought this was a beautiful idea that Rav Simcha Zissel, what it is that he made, what he did with this Targum Yonasan. One brief comment from a Targum Yonasan that he just says bias didn't just mean a house, it meant the base medrash. And here Rav Simcha Zissel, he milked out of that brief comment in the Targum Yonasan this beautiful idea, this fundamental idea about the role of Torah education in the Jewish community and absolutely how essential that is. And I hate to say it, but we've seen this play itself out throughout Jewish history. Those communities that put a great value on Torah education and made certain to educate the children and to make not just ram Torah down their throats, but make Judaism exciting, enriching, enjoyable. Those are the communities that stood the test of time. You can look at a map of the United States of America and you could go back in time and you can see at the turn of the 20th century how many more Orthodox shuls may have existed. I don't mean in terms of number-wise, how many Shomer Shabbos, because we probably have never had in America as many Shomer Shabbos Jews as we have now. But I mean in terms of shuls that officially were affiliated with the Orthodox interpretation of Judaism. And the members may not all have been Shomer Shabbos, but shuls that were out there and communities that were out there that still, to one degree or another, affiliated with Orthodox Judaism. Now, again, the numbers may be greater today in terms of actual participants, actual people who are Shomer Shabbos, but in terms of shuls, how they were spread out across the country and how in every state in these little small communities, you would have found places, definitely were. All those shuls, I shouldn't say all of them, but many, many, many of those places have either long since shut their doors or are no longer affiliated with Orthodox Judaism for any number of reasons. But one factor that a lot of people point to was the role of Jewish education in those communities. Some of those immigrants communities that came and set up Orthodox shuls, they put all of their value, they put all of their import and the greatest sense of importance on the shul. And that while that was important, that wasn't the greatest sense, because you can have a beautiful shul, but if you don't have a young generation who's educated and wants to live a Torah life, they're not going to take up the challenge of keeping that shul going. They're not going to want to keep those pews alive. They're not going to want to keep that minyan going unless they are engaged, unless they're interested, unless they're enriched and living and enjoying a Torah life. All those institutions will wither. And if they don't wither right away, over the course of time, they will. And unfortunately, this played itself out in so many communities, in so many states across America. And if you look now at the communities that did stand the test of time, the common denominator that you'll find amongst all of them is that they had a Jewish day school. They saw the importance. They realized how crucial it was, that the only way kids would survive in this great melting pot experiment. It's a wonderful country. We've been welcomed with open arms like no other country in our Jewish history has welcomed us, with so much love and affection and freedom from persecution. But at the same token, we're such a small minority here, and it's so easy to just get absorbed in the greater numbers and to become assimilated. The only communities that were able to stand the test of time were those who had the foresight and really the founders put the self-sacrifice to setting up Jewish day schools and making certain that those schools were good schools. They had good teachers, and they were making Yiddishkeit, they were making Judaism, they were making Torah and mitzvahs exciting and enriching for those kids. Those are the ones that have stood the test of time, and God willing, they should continue to stand the test of time. But it should always remind us where our main emphasis, our main focus needs to be on Torah education, because without enriching and meaningful Torah education, everything else will just not be able to stand the test of time. No matter how beautiful those institutions are, nonetheless, it just won't happen. And we've seen this play itself out, unfortunately. I want to share one more idea here with you. A beautiful Ramban on this week's Parsha. Rashi alludes to it, but the Ramban fleshes it out a lot more. So this is after the incident with Shechem. So again, they go to Sukkot, and they set up in Sukkot for either a year or 18 months. And after that, they go to Shechem. There's a terrible incident in Shechem where Dinah is abducted and assaulted. And then Shimon and Levi, they knock off Shechem. And then they go to return and finally to meet Yitzchak. So let's see what happens here. Vayavo Yaakov Luza. So Yaakov goes to meet Yitzchak. We're going to see about, Leila's just asking about Rivka. We're going to see about Rivka in a second. Vayavo Yaakov Luza. So after they left Shechem, Yaakov and the family, they arrive at Luz. Asher Beretz Canaan, he Beisel, that's right near Beisel. Hu v'cholav asher imo. Him and the whole family, the whole mishpacha, everyone was with him. Zayin, Vayiven Sham Mizbeach, they build a Mizbeach there. V'yikol ha'makom el Beisel, they call the place Beisel. Hisham niglu elav Elokim b'varchom achiv. That's where Hashem appeared to him when he was running away from Esav and leaving the land of Israel. That's the same place where he now sets up this Mizbeach. Vatamas Devora Meinekes Rivka. At this point, Devora, who was Rivka's nurse, passes away. Vatikaver mitachas lebeis el, and she was buried right beneath Beis El. Beis El was an elevated area, so this was right beneath that. Tachas ha'alon, and that was right beneath alon. Alon could either mean an oak tree. Here they translated it as a plane. I don't know why. It could mean a plane. It could mean a tree. Let's see. And it says Vayikra Shemo Alon Bachus, and they called, because that's where Devorah was buried, they called that place where they buried her Alon Bachus, the Alon of crying. Bachus means crying. Test one more pasuk. Vayira Elokim El Yaakov Od Bevo Mi Padan Aram. So now God appears to Yaakov one more time after he had fled from Padan Aram. Vayvarach, and he blessed him. So let's see Rashi. Rashi says Tachas Ha'alon. They buried Devorah underneath this alon. So again, alon could either mean a plane or it could mean an oak tree. So it says, but if you ever know, right near Efrat, there's alon shavut. So alon shavut means returning to that oak tree, because there had been a Jewish settlement there before the War of Independence. All the Jews had been kicked out. Some of them had been massacred there, and the survivors, or the ones who had left, had made a pledge that they would return to that oak tree. So they called it alon shavut when they returned after the 67 war. So let's see, Tachas ha'alon. So Devorah was buried under the alons, which either could mean the oak tree or it could mean the plane. So it says here, Rashi quotes a fascinating medrash. According to the medrash, why was it called alon bachus? Nisbaser sham be'evel sheni. While they were busy burying Devorah, they found out about another reason to mourn. Shehu gadlo al Moshe Mesa. Yaakov was informed by Hashem. He gave him some divine inspiration to let him know that his dear mother Rivka had also passed away. So Yaakov and the family, when they returned to Israel after 22 years away, they never got to hug his mother Rivka. He never was able to reunite with her. He reunites with Yitzchak. We'll see that in the Parsha. He never reunited with Rivka. When they were burying Devorah, he was informed that Rivka died as well. Va'alon b'lashon Yevani acher. In Yevani, which would mean Greek, alon means another. It means an additional one. So meaning alon b'chus would mean an additional crying. So because he was informed that Rivka died, so they had a double crying, and that's why it's called alon b'chus, the place of double crying. That's what it's alluding to. He cried for Devorah because he knew, she was the one who kind of raised him growing up. That was the nurse. And she was helpful in so many ways, but he also cried for his mother Rivka, who he was informed by Hashem had passed away. Last part of Rashi. Since the day of her death was concealed. In other words, why was the day of her death concealed? In other words, the Torah never tells us that Rivka died. It was totally hidden. Why was this detail not publicized? The world, Hashem did not want the world to curse the womb that had produced Esav. Therefore, the pasuk didn't publicize her death either. Meaning, Rashi's quoting this cryptic medrash that says that Yaakov was informed after Devorah died. He was also informed that his dear mother Rivka had died, and that's what Alon B'chus alludes to. why was her death not publicized? Because they were nervous if they sent out announcements, obituaries, and billboards saying that Rivka had passed away, then the world would say, Rivka died? Oh, once they're talking about Rivka, oh my gosh, I'm looking at the obituary. Who was she the mother of? She was the mother of both Yaakov and Esav, that good-for-nothing bandit, Esav. Ah, what a disgusting creature that is in this world. And they'd end up they'd end up cursing Rivka. She was the one who was responsible for bringing that bandit, for bringing that animal, Esav, into this world. So that's why the family did not publicize Rivka's passing. They didn't want the world to curse her. And the Medrash concludes by saying, since the family didn't publicize her passing, that's why the pasuk, the verse also does not publicize her passing. That's why nowhere in the Torah is it ever written that Rivka passed away. It's a famous Rashi it's a famous Medrash that Rashi quotes, but it's a very cryptic Medrash. There's a lot about this Medrash we don't understand. The Ramban's going to dissect it. So let's see this Ramban. This is a very, very interesting Ramban we're going to learn together now. Ramban starts off, Thomas Devorah menekes Rivka. So Devorah was the nurse of Rivka, died. Lo yadati. The Ramban says, I do not know. Lama nechnas hapasuk hazeh. What is this pasuk doing here in between? Vayirkol makom el Beisel. Yeah, the pasuk preceding this said that Yaakov and the family arrived in Beisel, and they called the place Beisel. Ubeid, and then you have the following pasuk after this one about Devorah dying, saying Vayera Elokim El Yaakov, that Hashem appeared to Yaakov a second time. What is this? Why do we need this business about Devorah? What's it doing here? They've sick bin Yanacher, and it's breaking up in the middle of a story that they arrive in Beisal, and then Hashem appears to Yaakov and gives him a bracha. Why is this story of Devorah doing here? It was when Yaakov Avinu showed up in Beisel, which is also Luza. That's where he builds a mizbeach. That's where he names it Beisel. The Nir Elohim, God appears to him and gives him a bracha. Why did they just jam this thing about Devorah in the middle? Why is that breaking the story up? The Karov, it says, it appears to me, this is how we would understand it. He says, Va'karov, what appears to me is as follows. Masha'amru Rabosenu, that I think what we need to do is work with the Medrash. The only way to understand this pasuk is to work with the Medrash that says what? Sheyirmos lemisas Rivka. That this pasuk is alluding, it's hinting to the fact that Rivka also died. That's why it's called Alon Bachus, either the oak of weeping or the plain of weeping. Because he's not saying, like what Rashi quoted, that alone in Greek means double or another. He's saying, why would you call this place Alon B'chus? Because Devorah died. That doesn't make much sense. There would not be such a reason to weep and to wail and to cry. Alamenekes has zakena, over an elderly nurse, sheikara shema makomalav, that you're going to name this. This is the first time we heard of Devorah. Was she such a significant member of the family unit that they started crying so terribly when she died, and they're going to name a place after that crying? No. Ramban says it must be that when Devorah died, that's when Hashem told Yaakov that his mother died, and that's what made the place all reduced to tears, and that's why they named it Alon Bachus. That's what he wants to say. So he says he goes, Aval Yaakov Bachav, Isabel Alimo. Yaakov was crying and mourning about his mother, Atzadekis, the righteous mother, Asher Avto, who he loved, and she loved him. B'sholcho, so she sent him away, Sham. She sent him away because she wanted to protect him from Esav and to find a wife, and he never merited seeing her again. He was heartbroken. He loved his mother. It was his mom who passed away. She saved his life. She was the one who wanted him to have the brachas. She saved his life. He wanted to come back and be hugged by her, and he lost that opportunity. That's why he was broken. That's why he was crying. That's why Hashem reveals himself to Yaakov, uberachoso, and gives him a bracha, lenachamo, to comfort him. So the Ramban's answering his question. This pasuk is not interrupting the flow. It's exactly where it needs to be. They arrive in Beisel, Devorah dies, Hashem gives him a nevuah, a prophecy that his mother also died. He breaks down into weeping, and now Hashem reveals himself to give him nechama, to give him comfort, and to give him a blessing. just like Hashem appeared to Yitzchak after Abraham died. And he tells you the pasuk where you can find that. Uvishneim, and by both of these incidents, Amru Chachamim, Birchas Avelim Barcho, that when Hashem revealed himself both to Yitzchak when Avram died and now to Yaakov when Rivka died, why did he give it? What bracha is this? It was the bracha of mourners to give him comfort. And you'll see this is also, there's a hint to this, what is beneath this a little bit later, that it says, how do I know that Rivka was dead? Because he says, look a little bit later. It says, Vayavo Yaakov el Yitzchak aviv mamrei Kiryas Arba. That Yaakov returns to his father Yitzchak in Kiryat Arba, which is by Hebron, and he finally reunites with him. And it says, V'ilu haisa Rivka sham. If Rivka was there, hayamasker el aviv el imo. If Rivka was there, the pasuk would have said that he was reunited with his father and his mother. But it didn't say that. It just said his father. How could I leave out the mother? She played a huge role in this story. She was the one who sent him away, also Sham. It was because of her that all this good befell him. That he got the brachos, that he was at Lavan's house, he got his wives, he's got the children, now he's very wealthy. She's responsible for all that. So how could it be that he returns to Yitzchak and it doesn't tell us that he also got a hug from his mama? It must be that she passed away. Yitzchak only advised him to leave because of her advice. So therefore, it would have made no sense that she was still alive and she wasn't mentioned. So this really alludes to the fact that she must have died. Now Ramban quotes Rashi. Because of Rashi, so now Rashi says, since the family didn't publicize the fact that Rivka had died, because they didn't want the world to start to curse her and say, curse the womb or the belly that Esav emerged from. So since the family didn't publicize that she died, also the pasuk didn't publicize it either. That's what Rashi quotes. So now the Ramban has a question, and he tells you that this is a medrash. He tells you where you can find it. Okay, but he goes, I got a little bit of a question on this medrash. Gam misas Leah lo yazkir. If you look in the Torah, there's nowhere that it's recorded when Leah dies. And nowhere there do we say, okay, there was some reason the world was trying to hide her death. Why now, okay, because Rivka's death wasn't mentioned, why do we think people would have cursed Rivka? No one says that Leah's death wasn't mentioned because people would have cursed Leah. So why do we think that people would have cursed Rivka? So look what he says here. So the Ramban has his own idea about why Rivka's death was not publicized. Not because they were nervous about people cursing, but rather another reason. Look what he says. Since the death was only mentioned in a hint, the Tala Adavar b'nei Kasa, and they said, how do we figure out that Rivka died? Because it says that Devorah, the nurse, died. So Nutaka, why didn't they publicize it? Why was Rivka's death not publicized? So look at the Ramban's theory. He says another thing. He goes, I don't understand the curse. What's the curse? That people, when they find out that Rivka dies, they're going to curse, oh, look at the belly that produced Esav, she should be cursed. 1 second. He says, that doesn't make sense. When Yitzchak dies, it says, so Esav Yaakov benav. Esav and Yaakov buried him. So the same way when Yitzchak dies was publicized, and no one's going to curse Yitzchak saying, oh, that's the man who played a role in producing Esav, and Esav was even at the funeral. So then why did they feel the need to hide the death of Rivka? It can't be they're so nervous about this curse. So look what he says. He says, Aval Yitaken. So he says an unbelievable theory. And then we'll read this one line and then I'll speak out the rest because we're running late on time. Aval Yitaken Lomar. Here's what you could possibly say. Shlohoya lo kavod b'misasa. You know why there was no publicity about her death? Because unfortunately, she did not receive any kavod when she died. She died at this point. When Devorah died, that's also when Rivka died. But sadly, she received no respect at her death. Why? Ki Yaakov einenu sham. Yaakov was not there for her funeral. He was still on his way back. The Esav soneosa. Esav hated his mother, so he wouldn't want to be at the funeral. why did Esav hate Rivka? She was the one who gave the brachos, wanted Yaakov to have the brachos. She was the one who was on to Esav that he was a rotten character and didn't like him. So Esav had no love for his mother. Below Yavashama, so he wouldn't come to the funeral. The Yitzchak, what about Yitzchak? Koenav, he was blind. He had lost his vision. Ve'eno yotzei mibeso, and he couldn't leave the house. It wasn't safe for him to go out walking. He'd stumble and fall and get himself hurt. That's why the pasuk didn't want to publicize Shikberua b'nei Ches. Who buried Rivka? Who took care of her funeral? The locals, the Chitim. She lived in Hebron. Remember Ephron Achiti, those Benos, the b'nei Ches, the descendants of Ches. They were the ones who took care of Rivka. So it's so sad. Until you see this Ramban, it's so sad is that not only did Rivka die and Yaakov wasn't there that he could give her a hug before she died, but Esav wasn't there. Her own husband couldn't attend to her at the funeral. Who buried her? These strangers, the Bnei Ches. And what did Rivka think about the Bnei Ches? Remember how much she loved the Bnei Ches? She was the one who said that if my son Yaakov marries one of the Benos Ches, one of the daughters, the local daughters, Lama Li Chaim, what do I need to live for? She did not think too highly of these people. And despite the fact she didn't think so highly of them, when it came time that she died, there was nobody to busy themselves, to dress her and to take her and to bury her other than those Benos Ches. They were the ones who buried her in the Maras HaMachpelah. So the Ramban's theory is, you know why the Torah doesn't mention her funeral? Because something very sad happened at that funeral. She wasn't surrounded. It wasn't a grave that was open and surrounded by loving family members. It was by these hostile neighbors. They gave her that kavod achron. You know, that's amazing to me, is that as degenerates as these locals were and why Rivka hated them so much, they were idolaters, nonetheless, they were the ones who gave her the kavod achron. They gave her that final honor. And that's that. But according to Rabban, that's his theory as to why it was that the Torah didn't tell us about her passing. I'm gonna stop the share there. Just to conclude here, the Ramban goes on a little. We're just out of time, and the Ramban shares with you. He says, "I found a medrash that talks about this," and the medrash says it a little bit differently. But he says, "I found a medrash that alludes to this as well. That it was the Bnei Ches, it was the Chitim who ended up burying Rivka." And he says that's his theory as to why it is that the Torah didn't publicize her passing. So just to conclude with that, there's something here in terms of Rivka's passing that the Torah only hints to it. It hints to it in the Parsha by telling us that Devorah passed away and they named the place Alon B'chus. Rashi says it was a double crying. They cried for Devorah and they cried for Rivka. Ramban says, I don't hear why they would have cried for Devorah. She wasn't a loving member of the family. They cried for Rivka. He agrees. Yeah, Yaakov got a nevuah that Rivka passed away. They cried for Rivka, and that's that. Now, why did the Torah hide her passing? So the Rashi quoted the Medrash, says it was nervous that people would curse Rivka if they publicized her passing. Ramban didn't like that idea so much, so Ramban has his own theory. The reason why her passing was not publicized is because something she didn't get the coverage she deserved at that passing, and therefore the family wasn't so happy. They weren't so proud of what happened. Unfortunately, those are the circumstances. Yaakov wasn't home yet. Esav wasn't going to show up. Yitzchak was too old and feeble and blind. He couldn't make it there. And the locals were the ones who took care of her kvura. That's what we know. That's what we know about her passing. So I think something just to think about when we read the Parsha this week is that, number one, that first idea about the Sukkos, that again, the Orach Chaim says that it was called Sukkos because Yaakov was the first one, his theory that Yaakov was the first one who came up with this compassion to show to those animals. There are opportunities around us to be compassionate with people, with animals, whatever, people around us that we may be overlooking. And it's kedai, it's worth our while to open our eyes and see, are we missing opportunities that might be there? That's number one. Number two, we saw that Rav Simcha Zissel reminded us about the Sukkos, that he said that the Targum Yonasan said the bias was a base medrash, and that's amazing. That what Bnei Yisrael built for themselves, a permanence, was a base medrash, was a house to study Torah, a day school, a yeshiva. That's what they said needs to be built. Everything else was temporary, and they called the place Sukkos. Everything is temporary except for the yeshiva. That has to be permanent. And how important the role of Jewish Torah education plays in Am Yisrael. That's a great reminder for us. And then lastly, this idea about the final days of Rivka, that's only hinted at in the Torah. There's only hints about Rivka's passing. There's no clear mention of her passing. Rashi gives us a tradition that he got from a medrash. The reason why her death was kept secret was because they didn't want the world to curse her because they hated Esav so much. Ramban has a different theory. Her death was kept secret because everyone felt bad about what happened to her in the end, about how she was buried, not surrounded by loving family, but by these neighbors who she did not think so highly of. They were the ones who ultimately did her the favor. I would just say, according to that Ramban, what is amazing to me is that, again, here are these B'nai Ches, these locals who she did not think highly of, yet it seems like they had enough menschlichkeit, they had enough derech eretz, that here was an important person in the community passed away. They still said, we're going to give her the kavod that she deserves. So even though the family couldn't be there for her, thank God those locals did something for her. I'm sure God rewarded them for whatever they did. All right, I'm going to